So a little over a year ago, my wife and I moved to North Olmsted, Ohio, and honestly, we don't regret it at all. We absolutely love living here. There's a lot to do, and today we're going to be going over exactly why I love this area and what made us move here. So about a year ago, my wife and I were living in Strongsville, Ohio. We had a great setup. We weren't planning on moving. We were just finishing up a renovation. The house butted up to the metro parks in the backyard, and overall, it was just a really solid spot to be. So honestly, there was no reason for us to move. But as we started to wrap up the renovation that we were working on, we were going to start our planning process for the next project, and we were really looking to get some sort of Airbnb or short-term rental for the next house that needed some work, and we could just buy it at a good price, put some money into it, and then get a little bit of equity out of it at the end, and essentially after it was refinanced, not have any of our own cash into it. At this point, we already had a few rentals, and some of them were Airbnb and some of them were long-term rentals. But our thinking was to get a house that is in a more trendy area. That way we could get some better income off of Airbnb, and also have a house that we could get away at and just be closer to the lake and downtown activities without actually having to live there. But some of those trendy target areas that we were going for was going to include anything from Tremont to Ohio City, Lakewood, anywhere that we could get a house for around $150,000 and put some work into it, and then have that $200,000 to $250,000 house. As we started looking at houses in those areas, we were noticing that they needed a ton of work, and that's nothing that's out of my realm for what I've done in the past. I've fully renovated houses all the way from the studs up, so realistically it was nothing new to me. However, every house that we were walking through had some sort of issue that we were not cool with as far as using it as a rental. Whether it was just simply a bad parking situation, maybe it was a horrible price as far as that compared to the amount of work that it needed. Some of the houses were in pretty bad areas compared to other areas that we were looking in. So we started to kind of expand our search and go over into some of the suburbs that surround that Cleveland area, just so that we had a little bit more opportunity as far as what we can choose. And the very first house that we walked through after we expanded that search criteria was actually in North Olmsted. It was this really cute ranch house built in the 1950s. It had that really cool retro vibe with the cove ceilings, and it had an interesting curved wall that separated the kitchen from the living room. And overall, it just felt like it was a home. It was horribly outdated and not taken super well care of because it was a rental beforehand that was mismanaged, in my opinion. Granted, they probably didn't think so, but me personally, I would have never rented it to someone in the condition that it was in. The exterior of the house was not kept up with. There were leaf piles everywhere. It looked like it hadn't been mowed in a really long time. The side of the house was covered in moss, and it was sitting on over half an acre. So there's a lot to keep up with as far as the property itself goes. Realistically, if I were to use it as an Airbnb in this condition, I would have just replaced the cabinets and redone the bathroom and just called it good. By adding the right furniture in there, it would have been a nice mid-century modern style home that would have been perfect for the Airbnb style. Because of the overlook from the living room into the backyard that it had, it just was a perfect serene feeling. Now in the yard alone, there were 15 trees that couldn't have been less than 50 years old. They were all super gorgeous. They were massive trees. And then behind the property was owned by the city, and in front of that property was the rec center. So realistically, it probably would never get built on back there. It just looked like you were in a really secluded area with still being a 5 to 10 minute walk away from the different stores that are nearby. Or if you were to drive, it would only take you 2.5 minutes. Now, like I said earlier, we were never planning on moving to the North Olmsted area. We wanted to stay in Strongsville and use this as a rental property. However, we were standing in the living room looking at that overlook into the backyard and kind of fell in love with it, honestly. We were standing there and I saw sort of a light bulb go off in Carly's head, and she was like, you know what, we should just live here. And then I remember looking out the window and back at her, and pretty sure my exact words were, damn it, you're right. Back in Strongsville, we didn't have much of a backyard. It was a pretty short distance before it dropped off into a creek, so we only had about 15 feet of backyard in there, and it was on a super steep hill, so it was almost unusable. It was so unusable to the point that we had to let our dogs out in the front yard just because there was no grass in the back for them to use, and there also was no back door or easy way to get down there. So the layout of this North Olmsted house just made so much more sense. The other hard part about the Strongsville house is that it has a really hard layout as far as entertaining goes. If you have any sort of trouble with stairs, you're going to have a pretty tough time getting into that house in Strongsville, just because no matter which way you go, you've got like 12 stairs either way to get inside. And that doesn't even bring into the fact that the driveway was on a super steep slope for this house because it was a raised ranch, so the garage was underneath the property itself. So overall, the North Olmsted Ranch made a lot more sense for us. It was on one level, it was only 2 steps to get inside. It's got a lot more parking, it's got a lot more space for entertaining, and the entertaining part is something that we really love doing, and it's not a fun time when you're not able to do it and get your friends and family together to just have different events and enjoy each other's company. So I think that was the real deciding factor for us actually wanting to move into this property. Even though this house only had a 1-car garage, they had plenty of space in the backyard for me to build another one if I ever absolutely needed that extra space. So that was kind of a downgrade, but there is a workaround for it, so I was totally okay with it. So at this point, we decided it was time to put an offer in on this house. We had seen that it had previously been under contract and came back up on the market, and that was another part of the timing that we had for it. It was just picture perfect moment to where we couldn't have gotten this deal unless we had been looking at this time at this location. And luckily I was friendly with the realtor who had the house listed. I'm a realtor myself, so if you're thinking about moving to the Cleveland area, feel free to reach out to me. All my contact info is down in the description. But that realtor was able to give me a little bit of information about the house and why it fell through previously. I was also able to get my hands on an old inspection, and after reviewing it, I was fine with what I was getting into. It was nothing I didn't already see as I was walking through the house. The reason the other buyer backed out was because there was knob and tube wiring everywhere all throughout the house. And realistically, the knob and tube isn't a big deal as long as it hasn't been tapped into improperly or it's not buried in insulation. It's just not up to today's standards. The other thing that spooked the buyer was that they used asbestos in the insulation in the walls. So there was these little like fiber material that is almost looked like a grain that was filling the inside of the walls. If that was ever disturbed or anything, it could cause breathing problems and cancer issues. So that was something that needed to get taken out, and I was planning on doing a pretty big renovation to the house already, so it was going to get extracted anyways. So when we did put that offer in, we lowballed them, and after a little bit of negotiation, we came to a purchase price of $155,000. And realistically, this house now is probably going to be worth closer to that 260, 270 mark. But since I was the one moving into this house, I did end up taking the renovation a little bit further than I would have if it just would have been for an Airbnb. I ended up taking out that weird curved wall in the living room that separates it from the kitchen, and I opened the whole space up. I put a big 20-foot beam in the ceiling all the way across, just so that way it was just one cohesive space, and we have it separated by furniture now. And I went back and rewired and re-insulated the whole house, and I put a second bathroom in on the mudroom. I put the laundry on a different location also by that bathroom, and I redid the primary bathroom as well. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot that got done. It felt like it took forever, but since I changed so much with the layout, the whole house needed replumbed anyways, so that also got done as well. So after we closed on the home, the next thing I knew, I had a new project to work on, and I got right to work. The whole thing took me about 2 or 3 months. It was just a lot of me working on it in my free time, and I would probably never do a live-in renovation like I did in Strongsville again. This one was a blessing because I was able to live in the Strongsville house and work on this house and not have to deal with having my living room, my office, and my kitchen all in one 10 by 10 bedroom in the back of the house while everything else was getting renovated. This just made the process a whole lot easier. I'm super thankful for how everything played out with this house because it was Carly's first house that we bought together. I ended up proposing to her in the backyard. We've had countless family and friend get-togethers. We've just created so many memories in the year or so that we've been here, and there's gonna be a lot more to come because we probably won't leave here until we do some sort of major upgrade. I wanna end up on some sort of acreage, and that's not something that you're going to find in this North Olmsted area. If I want that 10 plus acres, I'm probably gonna land in a more rural area, which is gonna end up being south, back closer to that Strongsville area, ideally in Hinckley or something along the lines of that, maybe Valley City. Now, as far as why we decided to make the move 30 minutes south from where we were at in Strongsville and completely change locations was the fact that my family lives over in this Olmsted area. I had a quick drive to my mom's and my brother's because they're in Olmsted Township. My sister's in Elyria, so that shortened that drive by about 15 minutes. So getting together with them is a lot more easy compared to what we had to do before to drive to get over to them. But the other thing about North Olmsted is that it still has a pretty great school district compared to some of the other cities in the Cleveland area. It's not as good as Strongsville or Bay Village or Rocky River, but it's still in those areas to where you have access to those prime locations. And honestly, North Olmsted has a lot to offer itself. So if I do end up having a kid here, I know that they're going to be safe, they're going to have a good education, and I don't really have a whole lot to worry about as far as that stuff goes. And here in North Olmsted, we've got a ton of shopping. I hinted at the fact that I could walk to my closest shopping center in about 10 minutes, and if I wanted to drive, it takes less than 5. Over in the Great Northern shopping area, you've got pretty much everything you could possibly want. You've got retail, you've got hardware, you've got grocery, there's restaurants. Everything you possibly need is in this area. And if you can't find what you need in this area, you've got access to some really quality cities that surround it. Bay Village, Rocky River, Avon, those are all going to have even more options for you. And Westlake is pretty close by, so you're going to have Crocker Park very quickly accessible as well. And I go there pretty much every day because that's where my gym's at, and Trader Joe's there is just super convenient to have. If I need to get to downtown Cleveland, I can do that in less than 25 minutes depending on what the traffic is. I can get up to Lake Erie in less than 15 minutes and be hanging out on the beach, or I can go travel south and go into the metro parks or the national park within that 30-minute drive. This area just has so much access to the south and the west side of Cleveland, just with the highway system that is available to it. North Olmsted is just one of those places where you can get that really high quality living for a pretty solid budget if you're on one, or if you have a bigger budget to work with, you have the availability to get whatever kind of house you need. You can get houses down in the $150,000 range like I did. Now, granted, those are few and far between, and they're going to need a lot of work. The more average price point for this area is going to be right around $250,000 to $350,000, but there's houses all the way up in the $700,000s that are going to be a lot bigger, and they're going to have a lot more land as well. So off the top of my head, as far as the negatives go for North Olmsted, there's only a couple that I can think of. One, it's in Cuyahoga County, and here we've got incredibly high taxes. You pay a RETA tax on your income, which is the city that you work in mixed with the city that you live in. So it's just more taxes that you pay. Not to mention our property taxes are incredibly high compared to the rest of Ohio. So that is kind of a pain, but it is tolerable if you're living in this area just because it is safe and you don't have to worry about a whole lot as far as living here goes. The other downside of the North Olmsted area is that Great Northern Mall is pretty run down at this point. It's not completely vacant, but I would say that it's on the verge of not being in a great position. Actually, an article came out recently that they are doing some sort of reform on it. In 2025, they're planning on turning that whole mall area into a mixed-use space. I'm not sure if they're going to do something similar to what they did in Parma with how they treated that mall and turned everything into an outdoor shopping complex, or if they're just going to restructure the inside of the mall and have different commercial opportunities coming into it rather than just retail stores. I guess we'll see what really comes of that in the future. As far as other negatives of living in the North Olmsted area, I don't really have any. And you would think after living here for over a year, I would have at least more than 2. Some better ones than the ones that I did come up with, but I really have no complaints about the area that I'm living in. Either way, I think that North Olmsted is a really solid spot to live and a great option to consider if you're thinking about moving to this area, and I hope you do too. Thanks for watching.